For more insights, we are joined by Stephen Nagy. He is Professor of Politics and International Studies at International Christian University. Well, welcome to East Asia Tonight, Prof. First, I just want to get your reaction to these executive orders and what are the implications, on some of the executive orders signed today, pulling out of international treaties such as the Paris Climate Accord. We've got the WHO. What can we expect over the next 4 years?
Well, there's a lot to unpackage here, but I think first and foremost, he's come in organized. He has a vision of where he'd like to take the country. And of course, he has all three pillars of American government behind him. This means that he can immediately make some choices and engage in some radical changes that he couldn't do in his first term as president back in 2017. WHO, Paris Climate Accords, rejecting these accords is a strong, strong rebuke, I think, of China and other countries that have really pushed the United States in different directions and challenged international institutions. The United States feels these international institutions are not working in America's favor and as a result rejects them. Where are we going? Of course, American first. We're going to see transactional diplomacy, and we're going to see the United States under President Trump use its most powerful weapon, its economy, to pressure allies and adversaries to change their behavior.
All right, and we've got China hawk Marco Rubio's the historic appointment as U.S. Secretary of State. But he's also at the same time sanctioned by China, right? So how will that status affect relations with Beijing? And essentially, does that signal that it's going to be a more confrontational approach to diplomacy?
Well, I think that Mr. Trump, through Marco Rubio, who has a long track record of really arguing against communism and pushing back against some of the human rights abuses and other challenges that come from communist states like China, he has made controversial statements about Taiwan, supporting Taiwan in the inclusion of international organizations. He has suggested that Taiwan could be an independent state. These are the reddest of red lines for Beijing, and this will be highly controversial within China. Beijing is likely to react through patience, through watching its words, and ensuring that it's watching what the United States actually does rather than what they actually say. And I think that's most important, not only for China, but to watch, but for all of United States allies and adversaries. What do they do rather than what they say? Because if we look at the track record of Mr. Trump and its past administration, he was willing to negotiate. He was willing to find compromise with both allies and adversaries, and that the rhetoric that he used was somewhat less of a reality than what was the compromise that came out in negotiations.
That's right. I guess it's not a surprise then. I mean that, President Trump actually chose to hold off immediate tariffs on China, for instance. Instead he called for a study on issues like unfair trade practices, deficits, currency manipulation, all of that. Does this signal that this could possibly open up a channel of negotiation and dialogue when it comes to trade policy with China?
Well, I think Mr. Trump's strategy is to attack, never declare failure or losing, and always declare victory. And I think this sentiment is pushing his negotiation tactics. And what we're likely to see, and we've already seen it, he's raised the specter of tariffs on close allies like Canada and Mexico, 25% to be exact. And if you're sitting in Beijing and you're wondering what's going on in the mind of President Trump, when he's actually putting tariffs on closest friends, you're likely thinking that the worst is yet to come in terms of the tariffs that are coming to Beijing. So I think they also understand that Mr. Trump's initial negotiating asks are very high, and then he comes down to some kind of middle ground. So again, I think that Beijing, but also other allies and adversaries of the United States, are watching the rhetoric, looking for that middle ground that they can come to some kind of negotiated settlement and push forward through some proactive and calm diplomacy. Whether that will work or not this time, I'm not so sure, because again, all three pillars of government are behind Mr. Trump. He has a relatively strong mandate. And again, unlike many administrations over the past 30 years, a strong vision of where he'd like to take the United States.
Yeah, so, what we're also watching out for is Trump with a possible visit to China this year, something that he's hinted. And if that happens, do you think some of the key issues likely to dominate the agenda would be like trade, for instance?
Trade, of course, fentanyl will be there. Of course, positions on China's more assertive behavior in the South China Sea and in the East China Sea. It really will depend on the dynamics moving forward and how successful he is in making those executive orders come a reality. The first 100 days, 3, 4 months of the presidency is really important in terms of gathering momentum and demonstrating that he can translate those words into actual policies that are changing the lives of Americans and making alliances stronger, or making it much more difficult for adversaries. And if he does continue the momentum that he has currently, it's going to put him in a very strong position in terms of trade negotiations with China, strong demands over fentanyl and other issues that are a disagreement between the two countries. But he also may step back on some of the security agreements or security commitments that he's made in the region. There's a lot going on in this puzzle. And I think that, again, we have to wait and see how successful he is over the next 100 days or longer.
Also, given these developments, we've got Rubio's appointment, Trump's evolving trade strategies, China's counter moves, right? How do you think China might adjust its approach to the U.S. and the sort of strategic recalibration that Beijing is considering right now?
Well, they've already started, to be frank. Before he was elected, the Chinese already reached out to the Australians. They reached out to the Indians and came to an agreement over the disagreements on the Himalayan plateau. We saw the Japanese foreign minister, Mr. Iwaya, in Beijing on Christmas Day, and the Japanese have given a 10-year visa to eligible Chinese citizens. There's even talk in Tokyo about a state visit by Xi Jinping to Tokyo. So they've reached out, they've tried to warm relations. I think they're practicing what I call economy of enemies. They just can't deal with the United States and the pressure that the Trump administration is going to ramp up on Beijing while having complicated relations with South Korea, with Japan, with Southeast Asian countries, with India, Australia, etc. So they're really reaching out to try and warm relations with potential partners of Washington. Second, they've loosened the trade restrictions and opened up their economy to massively export abroad prior to tariffs coming in. So to front load some of the pain that's going to come and boost the economy before the real pain starts. And they've also made some commitments to limiting the supply of gallium and other critical minerals that are important for technology and different industries. So they have some leverage, but ultimately, China is an exporter and exports about $700 to $800 billion of trade to the United States, and that is huge leverage on the U.S. side. If they stop that trade, it's going to affect an already hurting Chinese economy.
Always good speaking with you. Thanks so much for your insights there. Stephen Nagy, Professor of Politics and International Studies at International Christian University.